So I am about to say something a little bit controversial, just a tiny bit. Please don't cancel me, okay? I don't want to get canceled today. I'm not ready to go.
Despite Kristen Leo's staunch popularity, none of my polled viewers actually watch her, as she occupies a very special niche of women's and mainstream leftist audience. However, the topics that she addresses are extremely common in our private lives, and especially they are common for women. She of course comes from a particularly spiteful and frankly decadent perspective, with much of her videos can be summed up as straight up bitterness, as she admits herself.
Attempt to put me down by saying that I sound bitter, as if that is an offensive thing. I am so bitter and salty and also very petty. So no, I am not offended. Call me bitter as much as you want. Call me a spinster, call me a crazy cat lady. These are all compliments. Thank you.
By the way, it takes a special amount of courage to admit what are the real causes for your behavior, and frankly this is not the only positive characteristic that she possesses, as she also has a surprisingly remarkable degree of self-awareness for a leftist person, and probably a very high IQ. Not only that, but she is actually willing to look at things realistically sometimes, and is not really a social constructivist in the radical sense, but despite that I found her outlook to be radically ideological sometimes, and as a consequence not accurate in describing the observable phenomenon, but considering she interacts and consumes knowledge that is only one-sided, not surprising.
Now here what I wanted to say was someone of the same gender. But even saying gender excludes non-binary people.
Perhaps part of her circumstantial rejection of biology is due for the sake of maintaining opinions that are deemed luxurious as her fashion, and at the end of the day much of her opinion came about as a result of peer pressure.
Do you want to be on the side of history that sides with oppression? Or do you want to be on the right side of history?
When I was planning to write this script, I didn't expect to give her a lot of compliments, given that she stands for things I consider to be socially harmful, but despite that I can't help myself but appreciate a woman with a brain, which unfortunately is not a frequent occurring. So consider this to not just be a response video, but rather an analysis of Kristen Leo and the people that watch her, because she, unlike other leftists, did not really make a shit ton of claims that are worthy of critique and deconstruction beyond her own. Yeah, she literally debunked half of her arguments. She more or less acted as a storytelling narrator, providing some thoughts of her own that I want to address, and consequently I will have to unpack some of those sentiments that are foundational to her and her audience way of thinking, and not by calling her a degenerate, which is pretty much self-evident for my audience, because at the end of the day I really want to pull some of the people that watch her out of this decadent hate-filled existence that they live under, and towards something positive, and yes, towards appreciation for men, but it will be hardly achievable without addressing some of the real concerns of her audience, which might or might not be truly addressed in this video, as they are pretty significant and require a separate one. Now, I watched about 5 videos of her, starting with her confession of the sin of white privilege, which frankly was pretty funny for me, coming from a person who is living in Greece and casually dressing in clothing and doing mannerisms that are considered to be defining in white girl culture. But nonetheless, the core audience that watches her regularly does that for a couple of reasons, as evident by their commenting patterns. That is perceived injustice caused to women by the patriarchal nature of society, and a desire for a stable relationship and a regular commentary on trending social and women's issues. People want to hear her feminist and bitter messages about the nature of the world because there is a demand for it, as she admitted herself. So for the first time in my life, I'm seeing women publicly go off on men on TikTok like I've never seen it before. But now girls on TikTok are chanting in unison, "Kill all men." Men are trash.
all men have is the audacity. Wives are exposing their husband's inability to pick up their clothes or throw their Q-tips away, and everyone in the comments is shouting that they need to dump their ass. Girls that go against girl code and talk positively about men are ostracized and labeled as pick-me's, and most of us that have good taste end up on gay TikTok.
Things are changing and her commentary is now in demand. Now, I won't go as much for the reasons why it is the case now, as it will simply require a separate video and most of it is fashion anyways, so instead I'll just simply mention that because right-wing channels or apolitical channels have not tackled those same issues enough, as a result people have turned to bitterness that she represents. Similarly is said about the incel community, who were rejected by the mainstream and now resentful as a consequence of their perception of the feminist nature of our society, and sometimes I feel like the difference between what she is doing and what the incel community is doing comes down to a lack of institutional and popular support for the concerns raised by the incels. But at the core, both of those movements have more striking similarities than differences, such as being insecure about one's looks and a feeling of entitlement and the perceived injustices inflicted upon them. With this in mind, I will be going over one of her most recent videos titled The Collapse of Hetero Relationships, which goes as you would expect it to go, her cheering for the further collapse of it and being bitter about men. She starts off with an objectively accurate pretensions towards the matter man that would probably not be listed somewhere in the 19th century, not due to women's subordinate position, but because the men were not modern. Yet I don't blame her for that, as she lives in her own bubble and probably is not even aware of the harmful impacts on relationships that the modern society is inflicting upon men and women. But that was just a preface for the real video, in which she had argued that women should quit men and embrace decadency out of bitterness.
If you are queer, this video is simply going to confirm to you how unacceptable hets are, but if you are hetero, then please stick around because you are in for the journey of a lifetime. It's not going to be a nice journey, let me tell you that. And I am bringing you research, facts, studies. I'm not just gonna be pulling information out of my... So for all of us single ladies and all of you ladies that are gonna break up with your boyfriends after watching this video, you'll notice that once you become single, you have a lot more free time that you can dedicate to yourself.
That line of thought is pretty similar to men going their own way movement, with the exception that it is less explicitly resentful, but that may not be a good thing, as females' aggression is usually passive-aggressive, as we will see in this video. Her first real argument, or rather an observation, is of a family structure in ancient times, precisely that it was a polyamorous heaven, citing the Guardian's second-hand accounts of the early 20th century and 19th century anthropologists, the favorite master of storytelling, virtue-signaling historian Yuval Noah Harari, and of course Friedrich Engels, as you would expect for a channel like hers. For doing so, she even received a comment from her subscriber about how it's not academic of her to cite the Guardian, which I found to be rather pleasant and amusing coming from her own audience. And from that point on, I have prepared myself to debunk this nonsense that the ancient societies were apparently polyamorous heavens, as they were in fact polygamous and highly patriarchal, and the observations by those idiots are not accurate anyways. But surprisingly, I didn't have to. She did that herself.
For me, it's not enough proof that prehistoric humans were egalitarian, and that's because human anatomy and reproduction in and of itself is rigged against women. So basically, I'm not even coming for men, I am coming for nature. What the fuck, bitch? I thought you were one of us. Nature is not a woman. Nature is definitely a misogynist, let me tell you that. I also think that these male anthropologists' observations of these supposedly egalitarian, utopian, polyamorous, prehistoric tribes are in a lot of ways based on personal biases that they themselves have.
Now, this is worthy of a separate compliment, as she did something that Sean, Three Arrows, ContraPoints, Philosophy Tube, or other mainstream lunatics would never do: doubting their own dogmas. Just take a look at her comments regarding the social consequences of women entering the workforce.
Moreover, this fight for women to join the workforce mostly resulted in the doubling of the workforce, which led to more competition, which led to way lower wages.
In feminist circles, or at least the ones that I was in, this line of thinking is repressed and never mentioned, as it would threaten their institutional position and provide good ammunition for the people who care for a more equal economy and gender roles at the same time. Frankly, another compliment that I will give to her is that she trusts evolutionary and biological approaches, and it is a good watermark for her content, and of course not to the degree that it would also apply to transgenders, races, social mobility, and etc., but surprisingly she is clever enough to apply it to sex while being a feminist, and if you watch the full video in length, which will be in the description down below, you can clearly see her applying evolutionary lenses towards explaining the sexual variation and the nature of our society.
That would also sort of mean that patriarchy is part of a human survival strategy.
And let me tell you that it is very evident that she understands that men and women are not equal, and you would naturally assume that she would grow to accept this fact. However, she had turned into a totally different conclusion that unfortunately many other of her audience turn into as well. That is, resenting the natural inequality of the sexes, and as a result engaging in things that are maladaptive, and the rest of my video will just cover it. The prime example of that is her adoption of anti-natalist positions. Let's take a look at that.
So not only does pregnancy take a huge toll on the body, it also includes a high risk of death for the mother, and then if the birth is successful, the mother has to take care of a prematurely born mammal that cannot do absolutely anything for itself for a very long time and requires nursing for around 3 years. It's insane. It's not okay. I'm not okay with any of this.
Ironically enough, that will harm only her and her group and not help to fix the issues she fundamentally has a problem with, which is the male worship of Instagram models, addiction to video games, porn, asshole behavior, mistreatment of women, as well as the problems that are present in her own sex, such as a lack of confidence, Instagram influencers, and the crisis of relationship, which this video is supposedly all about. However, instead of trying to fix that, she grows a big sense of entitlement in her and her audience, pushing a message that they are too good for men, or that men must suck up to their entitled versions of themselves, and if he doesn't do that, he must be kicked out of their lives. Here are a few comments that I'll read up for you just to demonstrate the sense of entitlement that her audience now has as a result of her influence. Realizing how girls can't do anything without being made fun of or judged for, it has really led to my peak hate for men. Now, this comment alone is built on a legitimate pretension that this woman has towards men. However, adopting hateful feminist attitudes will do nothing but turn her into a forever single incel if this behavior was to continue, as I'm assuming she is in her early 20s, which is when the sexual value of women starts to drop rapidly, as Kristen had accidentally admitted herself in her video. When I think about what I want in a romantic relationship, that's what I want. I won't take anything less, because the amount of women and men I know who put up with heaps of garbage from their partner because they're chasing the idea of what their life should be is ridiculous. I've been judged for having high standards, but hello, this would be the person I will be sharing my life with. Why would I settle for less? Women need to be more prepared to walk away when men don't meet their standards. Bruh. And finally, my favorite one. I love your content and I agree with what you say, but you've unintentionally disenfranchised quite a few lesbians, and that hurts. As a lesbian, I'd usually expect to feel safe and respected in a in a feminist space, and this made me very uncomfortable. I'm not trying to cancel you or start an argument, but I do think this is an important point to be a feminist. It's important that you are also considerate of lesbian women too. Now, this last comment had kind of pissed me off, to be honest, as in the video she was encouraging lesbian relationships to replace well-adopted heterosexual relationships, even fantasized about how the life would be better under a matriarchy, and has expressed her wish to be with another woman.
I would be dating women, maybe. In a scenario where instead of patriarchy, we got matriarchy, a society that didn't shame that big part of women that are attracted to other women, and perhaps even encouraged and normalized that attraction, we would definitely be looking at a very different present.
But that community this person belongs to feels so entitled that everyone would constantly suck up to them that she is now even offended that this woman didn't go out of her way to apologize before lesbians for the unintentional disenfranchisement by her part. Frankly, this type of an entitlement is what she and her viewers criticize incels and men for having, and ironically it all manifests in her videos and her viewers' comments. And the biggest example of that would be her criticism of the feminist movement for not being radical enough, as she wants women to get paid for raising their own children.
Feminism kind of failed the moment that they started fighting for women to enter the workforce instead of first fighting for women to start getting handsomely compensated for raising people.
It is especially annoying to see this kind of an entitlement being made comorbid with man-hating that is present throughout her videos, and here's a small compilation of what she said in just one video.
If you're a woman in a relationship with a man, don't pay for shit. Not one thing. You shouldn't be paying for anything. As long as we live in a capitalistic, patriarchal society, we're never going to be equal to them.
Girl, just because you're comfortable dating your schmoll, bean, schmeagle-sized mousy boy that lives in the wall and eats cheese, doesn't mean that you have to bully the rest of us into liking that kind of thing. Do not shame other women for not finding your boyfriend attractive, like just because you're into bestiality doesn't mean the rest of us are. Okay, so this might come across as a little bit narcissistic, but I think I'm pretty awesome.
Best to let the unreasonable opposition speak, because they manifest themselves as unreasonable, and then everyone can see it.
All women would definitely be educated to the furthest extent of their desires. Around 40% of them would probably be in homosexual relationships. The birth rate would definitely drop based on those two things alone. And then the remaining 60% of women that may or may not be in polyamorous relationships with men would be having on average 1 to 2 children, which, if you do the math, is not enough to sustain the human population, and that matriarchal society would eventually die out, or they would be taken over by the neighboring patriarchal societies that have their baby-making slaves, producing a bunch of soldiers that would just eradicate everyone in the matriarchal societies. Maybe that's actually what even happened. So yeah, basically our species can only survive through the oppression and subjugation of people with wombs.
Out of some miracle, watching her video is like watching a dialectic. As a result of her deep self-awareness and knowledge of human biology, she does understand that males and females are naturally unequal, and perhaps fantasizing about matriarchy, polyamory, and other social degeneracy will not end up so well. Yet she still pushes herself and her audience towards adopting maladaptive behaviors, such as lesbian marriages, that are way more unstable than heterosexual marriages, despite her complaining about heterosexual marriages ending up in a divorce. While the divorce rate in lesbian marriages is 3 times as high. Funny how that works, isn't it? But let's assume she's not aware of that, and she might also not be aware of the fact that women have been selected to be adopted patriarchy, despite her general knowledge of evolutionary psychology, but she seems to be aware of something else. Something else that unfortunately PhilosophyTube, nor ContraPoints, nor Vosh, nor H Bomber Guy, nor any other degenerates are aware of.
Or we evolved in a way that the ones that did ignore that danger managed to pass on their genes, while the ones that observed that danger were aware of it and didn't want to have anything to do with it never passed on their genes. So people like me.
Deep down, she understands that her attitude decreases fitness levels and is maladaptive. This type of a self-awareness I see pretty often in people who grew up in non-luxurious conditions or in societies whose living conditions are either poor or are highly selective. But in spite of that, the emotions of resentment, hatred, and desperate attempts to build matriarchy or to equalize the outcomes of men and women are overshadowing her understanding of evolution, and as a consequence she resorts to pushing behaviors that are maladaptive. And frankly, this is not a bad thing, as political ideology is estimated to be about 0.5 genetic, and this woman's political ideology is simply maladaptive. The fewer people like that are being produced, ultimately the better it is for society. I don't really want to debunk any of what she said, or argue for monogamous heterosexuality, nor why it is wrong to hate men, and to an extent I've already did that in my long video titled The Homosexual Environment Scientific Analysis. I am in the opinion that relationships will continue to deteriorate until the society collapses, and there's little we can do about that, especially considering immigration, global warming, and the increasing wealth inequality. Eventually, the world will be dominated by better adapted conservatives and those who are far right, as they simply produce more children and are better prepared to live under Darwinian conditions, as opposed to her audience with only 64% of them planning to have at least one child, which is far below the replacement levels, not to mention that they're not even willing to take biology into account. In a long march to the future, their ideas will become less and less prevalent, as people who espouse them will simply die off because they are maladaptive, and frankly they are themselves at fault for adopting things that will clearly put them down. What we are experiencing right now can be best characterized as a behavior sink. However, unlike in the John Calhoun's Mouse Utopia experiment, we will never experience the symptom of overcrowding to the same extent as the mouse did. Instead, people that are maladaptive will simply not pass on their genes, as she had pointed out, and I'm in the opinion that there should be less people who are weak, and it's a rather pleasant feeling when the weak are taking care of themselves. Frankly, I would not recommend saving people who are far into that ideology, as probably genetics do play a role in that, and them dying off and not passing on their genes is ultimately of utility to the people of our views, not to mention to the society at large. But if someone who is watching me is empowered to reach to more people, they must address the topics that this woman is addressing, as ignoring them will simply move the people who are concerned with those topics towards her side, as she did not start as a political blogger like myself, but as an Instagram beauty model, and frankly had subversively imposed her political opinions on the people who were largely apolitical, which is a characterizing feature of the left, frankly, and a tactic that we should use as well. And believe it or not, I have already addressed that tactic in the video titled A Guide to Right-Wing Content Creation, so please give it a look, and I might eventually release a video or two regarding the issues with modern relationships or the plight of women, and also I might not. So instead of counting on me, you the viewer have to take the matters into your own hands and cover those topics independently for an effort to push valuable people to our side. But for now, we have to continue to endeavor these terrible side effects caused by the modern world going malfunctioning.
Girl, you locked that man down in high school. I'm almost 30. None of those men are available anymore. They were all taken in high school, and y'all got him and you never let him go, or you found them and you made them amazing. And personally, finding a man and making him a certain way is not something that I'm interested in at all. Like, I am not the Build-A-Man clinic. I'm not going to do that for free anymore. No, thank you. Secondly, to all the ladies that are in a relationship with that 0.5% of handsome men that are respectful towards women that tell me, you know, you're gonna find someone. I'm like, Mm,
Where?